Okay, welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Rob Steele, your host, and joining me today is Wael Jabir from Hustle Fund. Welcome to the show, Wael. It's awesome to have you. How are you doing today?
Thanks so much for having me, Rob.
Yeah, brilliant. Really looking forward to getting some insights and tips and tricks from you on your experience as Chief of Staff at Hustle Fund. And I believe today it's a celebration, right? It's 1 quarter celebrating being in the role. So congratulations. How's it been?
Thank you. I see you saw the LinkedIn post. Yeah, it's a coincidence that we're doing this today. It's been great. First quarter, it's been jam-packed, but it's good to kind of start getting, feel just for what the role is all about and just for what the organization is all about. So definitely feel we're hitting our stride going into Q2 and beyond. Super stoked for it.
Yeah, yeah. Can you dive a little bit or dig a little bit more into your path into a chief of staff, right? You come from a consulting background. What was it that, got you into the chief of staff role at Hustle Fund? How did you plan and how have the first 100 days gone? How have you approached or attacked those critical first 90, 100 days, right?
For sure. And I wish I could say, Rob, that it was planned, but I think as most careers, it wasn't. So, I started out of university as a consultant at Deloitte. I joined their AI consulting practice, spending 4 years there, especially in the past, with the AI boom that recently happened, was like a career changing experience, just getting to really be at the cutting edge of, I would say, some of the biggest innovations that are happening and really getting to work on like the product side, getting to get my hands dirty and what building technology just looks like. And so I always kind of had a knack for startups and venture capital, but just didn't necessarily know where I would want to plug in. And so while I was at Deloitte, I actually got involved with Angel Squad. So, Angel Squad is the global angel investor community that Hustle Fund has created. It's about 2,000 plus members at this stage. And so, I essentially joined it just as a way to, learn more about the space because I didn't know much. And so, when I joined, I just told myself, like, look, you can either go through this very passively, like you can just log into the community once a week, maybe like, join a few networking events here and there, or you can really like dig in and try and make the most of it and just like get as much learning in as possible to really understand if startups and VCs where you want to play. And so I chose that latter option. I pretty much just started putting my hand up for everything. Through that, got really involved with Bria Nichols, who is now my exec, and I serve as his chief of staff, who runs the Angel Squad community. And so got to work really closely with him. That was actually through about a year and a half, I would say, of just like working really closely side by side while I was part of the community. And so what was unique about that is I pretty much got to like serve as his chief of staff before actually formally taking on the role. And I think that was really cool because when I actually formally took on the role, I already had like that full on ramp for the most part of like understanding the way Brian works, the way Hustle Fund as a whole operates, what are some of the priorities and the whole ethos around Angel Squad. So I was able to hit the ground running. And so that was kind of my entry point. It wasn't planned at all. I just kind of, through getting involved, found VCs exactly where I wanted to play. And when I thought about what I wanted to do, I thought you can either take on an investment role that a lot of people do, where, maybe you're primarily focusing on like sourcing startups, writing investment memos. For the most part, that's primarily what a early stage investment role looks like. But for me, I was like, I really want to just kind of get like a very broad range of experience. I want to work on a bit of the investment side. I also want to understand like the operations behind a VC fund and also the whole community side of it. I want to understand what branding and media looks like. So what kind of lets you blend all that together and just give you that freedom is something called the chief of staff role, which has come up as of late. So that was my whole entry point and the whole reason why I got into it.
Yeah, yeah. I think the chief of staff is definitely one of those, what do you call it, the T-shaped job,
100%.
right? I think it's very broad, right? Was there any sort of skills or experiences or attributes? I mean, clearly the sort of proactiveness and curiosity you're bringing to the table, obviously with your Angel Squad experience and working with Brian on a pro bono basis, right? Lucky, lucky Brian, right? But was there any other sort of attributes or skills you brought from your time in Deloitte?
So I would say, Rob, and this is the thing about perhaps for just like my experience with chief of staff so far, it's not so much like a technical skill or a hard skill that really allows you to excel. It's a combination of, I guess, what some people refer to as soft skills. But what I mean by that is the consulting toolkit and the things that you learn in consulting. I understand a lot of the flack that it gets, but for some roles within operations, and in particular for chief of staff, it actually provides you a really great background for that. Why? Because in consulting, you're just given a very vague problem. You probably don't know anything about the space, and you just pretty much have to learn on the fly, which is a lot of what being a chief of staff is like. So sometimes you just have an idea out of the blue, and your role as a chief of staff is to execute on that. And so it's just pretty much understanding like to work with ambiguity, making assumptions, iterating quickly. And I think just that whole component of like learning as you go was really what allowed me to kind of come in, full speed, full steam ahead when I joined. And I think I credit like my time in consulting to that, just because so much of the work that you do there, it's okay, you're on a project, you got 6 weeks, you know nothing about the industry, nothing about the client, just run with it. And that's very similar to some of the projects that we do now and some of what my tasks are as a chief of staff.
Yeah, that's so true. Lots of skills that you can bring across, right, from other roles, right, into the chief of staff. But as you say, it is quite dealing with ambiguity, right, and it can be quite fuzzy. So how do you go about talking or articulating the value of a chief of staff, internally, and how do you measure the impact or the value that a chief of staff brings Hustle Fun?
Yeah, I think that this is where it's important to align on goals and targets with your exec and just the team as a whole. Because you're totally right. As a chief of staff, you can tackle a million things, but you really got to understand like what is the priority for the organization at that point in time? What are they trying to move the needle on? And so in our case, it was around growth in regards to like the Angel Squad community. So Angel Squad has been like an incredible community for the Hustle Fund team to have. We've built so many amazing connections through there. It's been a great source of like investment opportunities, support for our portfolio companies, and also just a way for us to like give back to a lot of the folks who have supported Hustle Fund from the early days. And so we find that like a lot of folks or the community in general, people love it, and we really are able to like deliver a lot of value to the folks that are there. But one of our key ideas was like, okay, how do we really start to grow this more? Like 2,000 members is amazing, but we always had a way bigger vision for this to really become like the go-to community for angel investing, not just in local markets, but globally as well. And we're really on a great path to do that. And so when I joined, Brian essentially told me, he's like, look, I think your key priority in the first few months is going to be how do we really like grow our community? What are some channels that we can really tap into, partnerships, events, things like that. And so from there, I had a pretty clear target of these are the metrics that Brian and the team are looking to target. Now, what are some of the levers that I can pull to really dive into this? And going back to our, initial point, you have a broad goal, an ambiguous goal, grow the Angel Squad community, and now you kind of have to figure out what does that even look like. And so that for those first few months has just been this first quarter, it's been a lot of iterating. So we've tried a lot of things that we haven't done before. A lot of them have been a great success, a lot of them have flopped, and I think that's to be expected. And so looking ahead to the second quarter and beyond, it's like, okay, now we just did this exercise. How do we double down on what's working? How do we save time on some of the things that we should be scrapping? And so for me, just in regards to your question around what are the goals or how do you measure success, it's defining clearly what the metrics are that you're looking to target. And that's going to change quarter to quarter, month to month, whatever it is. And then establishing a way, Brian and I have like a tracker that we check every week on, okay, what are our growth metrics look like today? What's the overall response? We did this event. What was the reception to that? And so that's kind of the iterative part of it all.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Yeah. And what does your cadence look like, with Brian, your principal? Is it a weekly? Do you have multiple sort of checkpoints every week? Were you focusing on the priorities, the goals? What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, so Brian has established like a really efficient way of working. And actually, even from my time before I joined him formally as his chief of staff, he completely transformed the way that I kind of viewed how to work efficiently as a team. Because in consulting, and I think as goes for a lot of large organizations, it's a lot of meetings. And so those meetings are at times productive, at times definitely not. And it wasn't until I started working with Brian that he really opened my eyes to like how working asynchronously can be a game changer. And so we use Loom a lot. Like that's actually the primary method that him and I communicate because he's based in San Francisco, I'm based in Toronto. So we're on two different coasts, but there's a lot of things like especially when you're brewing on an idea, you don't want to necessarily, jam that all into a text message over Slack because it gets lost in translation. And so Loom's really a game changer for that. Saves us on like all those meetings that I previously would have done of like, hey, 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, and then the day all of a sudden gets jammed up. It's just a quick 5 minute Loom. That's awesome. I can reply back in a Slack message, and then immediately we can start jamming out on it. The only synchronous call that we do is once a week, every week on Mondays. We do an hour just to plan out what the week looks like. What are the priorities? What was the reflection of the past week? Where we are in some of our targets. And that's been a really great, I think cadence for us. But what also makes that work is prepping a lot before that Monday meeting. So before that Monday meeting, Sunday evening even, I'm going in, I'm looking at what were, as Brian is, what were some of the targets from last week? Where do we stand on those? What are some things that came up last week that are priorities this week? So we come in with a clear agenda, already have some things fleshed out, and it's just a matter of prioritizing.
Yeah, that's cool. So it's sort of, would you say it's 50-50 sort of split between sort of prioritizing the week ahead and then doing a sort of mini retrospective on the previous week?
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think it's also like a 25% we just get carried away excited about an idea and it's just like fun. It's super fun to jam out on things sometimes. So I think that's also a key part of it is being chief of staff to someone. It's a very personal role. And so you really get to know each other like more, I would say, than a lot of other roles, more than just like on a working basis. You get to understand like what that person's all about, what are some of their goals, what's their own mission behind the work that they do, what's their family life like. And so I think that part of it's really important because it builds a lot of the trust behind that relationship as well.
Yeah. And how have you found that? Obviously, remotely, working remotely or, separated and not sort of having that sort of face to face time on a weekly basis with your principal. And also with the other leaders in the business, right? How have you found, or what have you had to use to develop and build that trust and those relationships, those partnerships with Brian, but also other people in the business?
That's a great question. And I think, it's crazy to me because I graduated university as soon as the pandemic hit. And so my whole working experience has been like this remote structure. Whereas, I think a lot of people, if you were working before that, this was a big transition. But it's funny when I get asked this question, it's like that's all I've really known. Like I don't know about, working in person with somebody 5 days a week, but I fully understand that that's a very valuable component to it. So to answer your question, we're a distributed team. And so of course, like with that to navigate it, there's certain things you need to put in place just in regards to working efficiently together and also having that personal connection to each other. So I would say like the cadence of just keeping direct contact with Brian, whether it's through, the meetings that we have each week and also each day like we're in constant communication with each other. I think that's a great way just to establish that because as mentioned, like naturally conversations will kind of flow outside of just directly what you're working on and you're able to build a bit more of that personal connection and that flows across the team as well. And so we also try to get together, for certain events throughout the year just to make sure that we are having that in-person connection. We have a big event happening actually just this coming month in May called Camp Hustle. So the whole team will be there. That'll be a really cool opportunity. It'll be the first time I meet a lot of folks as well. And so, you're right. It's important to bake that layer into it, especially when you're remote. But I think the team has found like a really great way to do that. And I think just we have a very transparent and like direct culture at Hustle Fund, which I think just whether you're in person or not allows you to feel, very comfortable with the folks that you're working with.
Yeah. Yeah. What does your operating system look like from a chief of staff point of view? Is there any routines, frameworks, tools that you've sort of set up or use or you swear by in your role?
I keep it pretty simple, Rob. So for me, like I live by Notion. So Notion is where I track pretty much everything. It's where I set up like the trackers where Brian and I will review each week. It's where I set up like planning docs, calendars, social media dates, things like that. So Notion has kind of been my go-to. On top of that, like we use not just for myself, but as a team, we use like a lot of automation tools. And those have been a really big game changer because I wasn't exposed to those prior to joining Hustle Fund. But what always impressed me is how fast the team moves, especially for the size that they are. And now being on the other side of it, joining the team full time, I can see exactly why that is because they're able to leverage systems and automations really efficiently. I had never used Zapier before, but just that simple tool, once you really tap into it, can really be a game changer. So things like Zapier and Airtable as well, not just for myself, but just for our whole team, really power like a lot of the operations. And I think what's also been really cool is that this team is like fully, it's I would say like AI native.
Mm.
We don't just like adopt an AI tool here or there. We've really like baked it into our whole operating system. And I actually mentioned this just earlier this week in a post I had written, but I think that for companies in general, it's gotten to that point now. Like you can no longer just kind of, tinker with AI here and there. I think it really has to be baked into your everyday operations. And I think you really have to have that agency component built in. And I'm really grateful that I got that exposure here. So I would say those are just a few of our systems or tools that we use just to juggle the number of things that the team has going on.
Got a lot going on, right? You've got a growing portfolio of startups you work with. You've got a growing angel group community. Um, Across your portfolio companies, and I guess in the startup scene in general, what are you seeing in terms of chiefs of staff? Is that something that's increasing in popularity with founders bringing a chief of staff role into a business? In your
From what I've seen, 100%. And what's actually really surprised me is how early on they're bringing them. I would have thought that maybe you prioritize like some other hires. First, you build out like your engineering or your product team, and build out the growth team, and then you maybe bring on that force multiplier, which is a chief of staff. But I've seen early stage startups have a chief of staff as one of their first hires to the CEO. And I think that kind of speaks to just the impact that the role can really bring because startups are lean and you really got to be intentional with who you're bringing on. And so to bring on somebody who you think can really be an extension of the CEO and have that same kind of impact and really be that force multiplier, I think if it wasn't working, we wouldn't be seeing it as an upwards trend. So 100%, seeing it a lot more in startups and just the earliness of when some founders are bringing on a chief of staff has been really interesting to see.
Yeah, what's the earliest you've seen, startups bringing in a chief of staff in terms
So
of size or stage?
yeah, so I have been seeing a lot of folks and just in my network bringing them on like at the seed stage. So they raise their seed round and it's still like, sub 10 members on the team and they have that chief of staff posting up looking for someone to join in.
All right. What would you say is your spiciest take on the chief of staff role that maybe others might not agree with you?
That's a very interesting question.
Anything controversial or
Ooh,
semi-controversial?
that's interesting. I think what I would say, and this probably isn't controversial, but I think that as a chief of staff, your role is you're a storyteller. And what I mean by that is like everything that you do, it's either to communicate, it's to persuade, it's to convince people about. And so I think writing has been something that like I always overlooked as a skill, but now I'm just seeing like the insane impact it can have. There's a very big difference between just writing for the sake of writing and being a good or a great writer. And the ROI on that is incomparable. And so, as a chief of staff, I think like if I was to tell somebody what's the number one skill I would recommend you really get honed in on, it's writing. And it's how do you like tell a story through your writing? How do you It's the whole thing around, like what the LinkedIn influencers are talking about. Like, what's the hook? Why is somebody paying attention to you and why are they taking the time to read through that? Because if you're a chief of staff, like even communicating with your exec, they've got 1,000 things on the go. How are you going to distill down what you need to say to them in just a handful of words? And how are you going to try to persuade them to, go about like a project or something that you have in mind? Because also a lot of what your part of chief of staff is to challenge your exec on the ideas that they have, and not even challenge them, but also to bring your own ideas. You're coming in as a fresh pair of eyes. You're almost like a consultant in some sense. And so if you're just waiting for your chief of staff to tell, or for your exec to tell you what to do, you're missing so much of the value that you can bring as a fresh perspective. And so it goes back to just that storytelling piece. It's how do you communicate those ideas effectively? I think a lot of what you do as well, regardless of where you work as a chief of staff, will be like around building a brand and building a community. I think that's one thing that chief of staffs can really tap into as well. And so how do you get people behind the mission that you're all about? And writing has been a key component to that, especially in a world where I think like video has taken a flood for a lot of platforms. I like LinkedIn a lot because it's still like a text first platform. And if you're a great writer there, you can really have some amazing impact and just bring a lot of investment back to whatever you're working on. So to sum it up, I think storytelling is the number one thing that a chief of staff does. And it's what I would encourage everyone to just really try and hone in on.
Yeah, I've been enjoying your LinkedIn posts, so keep up the
Thank you
great
so
work.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's apart from just like shining a light on some of the work that we do, having a platform like that just to distill your ideas down is really beneficial for yourself. Like sometimes I feel some of my ideas come to me that I then can take over to Brian only because like I'm thinking of what to write for content. And so it's a great just kind of generator for that. I'd encourage everyone to really try and hone in, not just for the sake of like building a personal brand, but just as a creative outlet to distill your ideas on some kind of platform.
Yeah, that's a great tip. That's a great tip. All right, well, this has been incredibly insightful. Like we're coming to towards the end of our time together. But before we wrap up, is there any sort of top tips, any sort of final advice you want to give any of the listeners?
I would say really check out this role. I think that especially if you're early career and you're just not necessarily sure where you want to plug into, I can't think of a role that provides you more of a diverse experience and also just allows you to really hone in on where you kind of want to double down. I right now like I feel like I just want to continue on as a chief of staff for years because I've found like the role is just a ton of fun. You learn so much day in, day out. And I think we are kind of moving more towards, as you mentioned, Rob, like that T shape where it's not enough to just be specialized in one single thing. Specialization is great, but having that generalist skill set where you're really able to plug in a lot of different domains is really great. And I think chief of staff is one of those roles that gives you exactly that. And so I would say whether you're joining a startup, a big tech firm, a VC fund, think about this role and really give it some consideration because it can be a game changer.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and insights. In the first 100 days in the role at Hustle Fund, it's been a real pleasure talking to you as well today. So, for our listeners who want to follow along with you on LinkedIn or elsewhere, where's the best place to find you online?
LinkedIn's my spot. So you'll see me frequent LinkedIn. I keep myself to LinkedIn. I think it's the platform that's on the come up. So check me out there.
That's awesome. Awesome. We'll link your LinkedIn profile in the show notes and we'll share that with everyone as well. But thank you very much once again. That was absolutely awesome.
Thanks so much, Rob. Really appreciate it.
All right. Cheers. Okay, that's a wrap. Well, that was brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank